Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7, live from Glasgow. I am Scott Bevan. I am joined here today by PhD student at Strathclyde Uni and Treasurer of Out for Indie, Erin Lux. Hello Erin.
Hello. Nice to be here.
There. Nice to have you here. First then, with the coronavirus update. As of 2 p.m. today, a total of 2,473,493 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 2,132,186 have been confirmed negative. 341,307 have tested positive. Today's figures have been reduced to remove 742 duplicate historic cases. There are 1,179 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although not everyone with the virus will display symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There are 9 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 7,911. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days, plus a correction to include an additional 36 historic deaths not previously reported. Of the people who have tested positive, 474 were in hospital last night, 63 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,002,903 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination and 3,125,690 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures up until yesterday show 129,430 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 91 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. The NRS update then, as of the 25th of July, 10,324 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where the novel coronavirus COVID-19 was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published by the National Records of Scotland today. In the week from the 19th of July to the 25th of July, 56 deaths were registered that mentioned COVID-19 on the death certificate, an increase of 9 deaths from the previous week. Deaths from all causes were 11% higher than the 5-year average last week at 1,110. Most excess deaths occurred at home, with home and non-institution deaths remaining around a third above average. Our top story this evening then, the RNLI has hit out at migrant taxi service accusations. The Royal National Lifeboat Institution has hit out at accusations it is operating a migrant taxi service by rescuing people at risk of dying in the water as they cross the channel in small boats, which the charity says it has a moral and legal duty to do. Responding to accusations from Nigel Farage that it is facilitating illegal migration, the volunteer lifeboat charity said it was very proud of its humanitarian work and it would continue to respond to Coast Guard call-outs to rescue at-risk channel migrants in line with its legal duty under international maritime law. Imagine being out of sight of land, running out of fuel, coming across incredibly busy shipping lanes when you're frightened and you don't know which direction you're going in, they have said. That is, by anyone's standards, distress. Our role in this is incredibly important, simply to respond to a need to save lives, said Mark Dowie, the chief executive of the RNLI. Dowie's comments came as the government prepared to enact its controversial Borders and Nationality Bill, which aims to reduce the number of crossings by criminalising migrants who attempt illegal routes into the UK rather than entering via settlement schemes. The RNLI is looking to promote empathy and understanding among the British public with respect to migrants crossing the Channel, following criticism on social media of its humanitarian work after it was included in a Daily Mail article that claimed to reveal migration madness. Dowie said he had spoken to crew members who shared harrowing details of an appalling melting pot of possible risks to understand the plight facing migrants and wanted to share these more widely. I understand it's a polarising and complex situation, he said, but unless you've experienced being in an open boat in the waves, it's quite hard to get a feel for what it must be like. Anonymised testimonies from crew members released by the RNLI shed light on the dangerous situations for migrants. These include people lost in the ocean for 30 hours in -2 degrees Celsius, temperatures in January, families suffering from severe heat stroke and seasickness on sweltering summer days, people travelling on unseaworthy vessels such as inflatable dinghies, sailing catamarans and canoes, or sometimes floating on the broken remnants of boats without any life jackets, hoping to be saved. In a tweet, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, "Beyond depressing that saving human life is work that an organisation is forced to defend, migrants are human beings whose lives matter. Thank you, RNLI, for all that you do." Well, Erin, it is a very depressing thing that we're having to talk about this, of course. Do you really think that people would rather that people drown than come into these islands?
I honestly think that most of the people who engage in this rhetoric don't really understand that that is the choice that is before them, either letting people drown or rescuing them and bringing them to shore. And I think the entire rhetoric around this is there's a complete lack of understanding that there are a lack of safe and legal routes into the UK and into safe countries. And when we're talking about things like the Borders and Nationalities Bill, when we say things like people should be criminalized for entering the UK through other than legal means, that is totally ignorant of how especially like asylum seekers and refugees need to enter the country. You're allowed to enter a country to claim asylum, regardless of where you enter it, regardless of whether you enter it at a legal border crossing or through any sort of pre-approved means.
Yeah. Do we have a situation now then where the emergency services are at odds with the UK government?
Well, it isn't the emergency services that are at odds with the UK government. It seems to be the UK government that are at odds with the emergency services. The emergency services are doing their job. Their job is to save lives. Their job is to not leave people in distress at sea. If the UK government has decided that that is a problem for them, that is the UK government starting a conflict, not the emergency services.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you think that things like this, the RNLI continuing to say, look, we are going to do this regardless of what you're saying, do you think that's going to force the government into rethinking any of their policies at all, or do you think that they're just going to continue sort of gung-ho with this Borders Bill?
I am deeply concerned about what the UK government may do. Priti Patel has form attacking people who are just trying to do their jobs. Her comments about lawyers, for instance, have resulted in attacks on lawyers. So I'm not sure that she will stop from this. That this will stop her from her chosen path.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. Moving on then, Rishi Sunak has been accused of shortchanging Scotland on youth jobs. New figures show that of the 250,000 jobs the Chancellor promised would be created by the Kickstart scheme across the UK, only 1.5 have been started in Scotland since it launched 10 months ago. Based on population share, Scotland should have around 20,500 of the 250,000 Kickstart jobs promised by the UK government, but only 3,830 have been started, and 10,740 have been made available to Scotland. An answer to SNP MP Stephen Flynn's parliamentary question on the Kickstart scheme revealed that in total, so far, the UK 148,000 jobs have been made available for young people to apply for through the Kickstart scheme, but only 44,000 young people have started these jobs. Erin, if The Tories want to convince people of the merits of staying in the union, as I guess they do. Does it make any sense to give Scottish people less than they are due under the schemes as they were set out?
No, I mean, one would hope that if they're trying to convince us that there is merit in being in the UK, that they would try to ensure that we receive the share of funding and services that we should proportionally to our population. And if they're not doing that, that's just further evidence that they aren't taking into account Scotland's needs.
Yeah. I mean, we've got about 8.5% of the 8% of the population of the UK, really. In Scotland,
Mm-hmm.
it fluctuates, it goes up and down. Um, but we're not getting even 8% of the benefits, are we,
Mm-hmm.
of anything that's coming from the UK government? And there are those who would argue that the UK government is not providing a lot of benefits for anyone in the UK. But certainly
Mm-hmm.
in Scotland, anything that is coming to Scotland, it's not proportionate, is it?
No, absolutely. It's not proportionate at all. And that's, yeah, just further evidence that, yes, as you say, what few benefits anyone gets from the UK government, that we aren't even receiving an equal share of those.
Do you think things would be any different under a Labour government or a coalition government in Westminster? Do you think that Scotland would be treated with any more respect than they have been potentially under the Conservative government we've had for the past 10 years?
I think this is a broader structural issue than it is an issue of party. We'd be fighting for a slice of a larger pie in terms of a government that isn't committed to um, not providing sufficient services, but it would still constantly be arguing for our share instead of having our own government to meet our own needs.
Mm. Well, in Scottish Government news, then, £70 million investment has been made available in youth employment. Young people looking to enter the workforce will benefit from 70 million of investment from the Scottish Government. The Young Person's Guarantee aims to protect people from the economic impact of COVID-19 by offering every 16 to 24-year-old in Scotland the opportunity of a job, apprenticeship, further or higher education, training programme or volunteer position. The announcement meets four of the commitments for the first 100 days of this government and comes as a new report highlights the progress of the Young Person's Guarantee. Since it was officially launched in November of 2020, funding has been committed to create up to 18,000 training, job and apprenticeship opportunities for young people. The 17 million of investment includes 45 million for local partnerships to provide training, employer recruitment incentives and mental health interventions for young people. 13.5 million for colleges, universities and the Scottish Funding Council to provide industry-focused courses supporting up to 5,000 young people and employment support for 500 recent graduates. 10 million for the rollout of new school coordinators and enhanced school provision to support young people access education, work and training, and 1.5 million to increase places on volunteering and third sector programmes. There's a stark contrast, isn't there, Erin, between what the Scottish Government are doing and what the Conservative Government in London are doing for Scottish people and indeed people across the UK?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm happy to see that the Scottish Government is focusing on young people because young people have made enormous sacrifices over the last year and a half. Um, when young people, they've just made enormous sacrifices when those years are irreplaceable. Your sort of early career years, your sort of end of university years. So it's good to see that's being taken into account.
Yeah, I mean, why is it then that the Scottish Government have decided to release these figures and say what they're doing here on the same day that we're hearing about the failures of the Conservative government in this regard? Do you think that's a deliberate attempt to show the contrast and what's going on there?
I mean, it may or may not be, but it does definitely highlight a difference in accountability and transparency, to be sure.
Mm. I mean, certainly there's a lot of investment that's going in from the Scottish Government into young people's jobs. Is it going to be enough, though? Because this is why we were talking about the investment from the UK government, is because there's still lots of young people who are struggling to find work, isn't there? And although the Scottish Government are saying that this is going to cover 100% of young people, a lot of these positions will be part-time, they will be volunteering positions because the Scottish Government simply don't have the funds, do they, to allow everyone to have the opportunities perhaps that they would do if they had more powers.
Yes, absolutely. And this highlights one of the problems of devolved governments is the devolved governments are often called upon to sort of fill the gaps left by the UK government and by austerity since 2010. And it isn't really in the gift of the devolved parliaments, even or the devolved governments, even when they have technically the powers to do so, they do not. They are not able to deficit spend.
Yeah.
So there is very limited leeway for either the Scottish or Welsh governments to fill in these gaps.
Yeah. Is that one of the things that control over borrowing would make a massive difference to, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the things that is tying the hands of the Scottish government is inability to borrow, which just completely hobbles any attempt to have to fill those gaps from Westminster. Of course, we shouldn't have to be existing to fill gaps from Westminster. If that is an argument, then that should be an argument for not needing Westminster at all.
Yeah. And is it an argument for it if we were if we're still going to be in the UK, is it an argument for it? It should be the other way around. It should be if there's any gaps that the Scottish government can't provide, then the UK government should step in to help, and that should be their role if we, in an ideal setup.
I suppose that would be an argument for a Devomax type setup, but I just don't think that's viable. I mean, this is really an argument for independence. That if we are constantly having to fill the gaps of Westminster, then Westminster just isn't fit for purpose.
Mm. Fair enough. Thank you very much, Erin. Moving on, then, the UK government has been criticised over a £250 million royal yacht bill. The SNP has condemned the Tory government's plans to hand taxpayers an eye-watering £250 million for its new royal yacht, at the same time as cutting crucial COVID financial support, after the Defence Secretary today outlined further details of the vanity project. Ben Wallace today confirmed plans to commission the ship for between £200 million and £250 million, and to then begin construction on the yacht as early as next year, despite the UK being in the middle of a global pandemic and economic crisis. It comes at the same time as the Tory government's refusal to heed calls to fully extend the furlough scheme for as long as necessary to ditch plans to scrap the £20 uplift to universal credit this September. Commenting, SNP MP Dave Duggan said the Tory government has repeatedly rejected calls to extend the £20 universal credit uplift beyond September, failed to provide sufficient support to the 3 million excluded self-employed people throughout the pandemic, is intent on prematurely pulling crucial COVID income support schemes, and has shamefully slashed the age budget for the world's poorest and most vulnerable. Yet we are asked to believe by this same government that a £250 million royal yacht is the best use of public money as we begin to recover from the pandemic with national debt at an all-time high. This eye-watering bill being handed to the taxpayer is indefensible. And do you think that the SNP are right on this, that having a royal yacht being built for £250 million during a pandemic is indefensible?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, the argument that the Conservative government is trying to make for the royal yacht, the arguments are ridiculous. One of the arguments they've made is this will boost trade. Like this doesn't make any sense. This isn't the 19th century. We aren't sailing around the world trying to impress them with our shiny boats. And additionally, I mean, yes, we can't compare 250 million to the cost of things like sick pay, universal credit, etc. But it does show their priorities, that they are willing to spend money on some things, and that is fancy toys instead of on supporting people so that they can afford to take time off work to self-isolate, supporting the poorest people in the world from with our aid budget, or supporting people here through the universal credit uplift. These just aren't priorities for them compared to a vanity project.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about a royal yacht, the Queen doesn't want it, does she? I mean, it's not often that we get to hear what the Queen's views on things are, but it's been quite widely reported that the Queen and the royal family don't want this royal yacht. So why are the Conservatives intent on building it?
It's a mystery. It seems like they just want some another vanity project, and much like everything associated with Brexit, they just want something else to slap a flag on.
Well, on the topic of the Queen, then, the Queen's consent motion has been used to influence legislation in favour of the Queen. The Queen's lawyers have been lobbying the Scottish Government to change a draft law to exempt her private land from a legislation to cut carbon emissions. The exemption means the Queen, one of the largest landowners in Scotland, is the only person in the country not required to facilitate the construction of pipelines to heat buildings using renewable energy. Her lawyers secured the dispensation from Scotland's government 5 months ago by exploiting an obscure parliamentary procedure known as Queen's Consent, which gives the monarch advance sight of legislation. The arcane parliamentary mechanism has been borrowed from Westminster, where it has existed as a custom since the 1700s. And the move appears at odds with the royal family's public commitment to tackling the climate crisis, with Prince William recently joining his father, Charles, in campaigning to cut emissions and protect the planet. Erin, is this evidence that the royal family are abusing their constitutional position?
I mean, I would say so. I mean, this is not the first time we have heard of the use of Queen's consent to affect laws that concern the Queen. And I mean, I don't make any bones about this. I am a Republican. I think the royal family is archaic and unnecessary, and the entire system of titles and royals has to go for us to become a modern country, would support an independent Scotland being a republic. So perhaps I am biased here, but this just seems like another clear cut case of interference by an unelected head of state.
Yeah. Well, what would be the consequences then if the Scottish Government had refused this? So if the Scottish Government said, well, no, you can't be exempt, as a few MSPs had pointed out, even at the time, before they knew exactly where this was coming from, what would be the consequences?
I'm not really a constitutional scholar, so I'm not sure um, to what extent the Scottish Parliament would cause a conflict by refusing, or the Scottish Government would cause a conflict by refusing um, to agree with this. I'm really not
Yeah.
sure
Well,
what the legal
could the
position there
Queen
would be.
could the Queen have held this up and
This
stopped
isn't
it
my
from
field,
happening?
unfortunately.
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, we don't know what the consequences really would be, do we? That's the problem. With this, if the Queen turns around and says, "Yeah, I'll sign the bill as long as you do X, Y, and Z, or as long as I'm exempt, or whatever it is that they are
Hmm.
lobbying for," um,
Hmm.
it seems that the Scottish Government have gone along with this. Why would they have gone along with this unless there is some sort of consequence to not doing so?
Hmm.
You know?
Which I think probably speaks to a lack of transparency, as opposed to, or a lack of transparency about what the Queen's actual role is, and to what extent she could cause problems if we'd refused. But I really don't know. And I think that's possibly a problem that I don't think very many of us know.
Yeah. Is there a hypocrisy then in Prince Charles and Prince William coming out and making documentaries and saying that they are committed to tackling the climate crisis and this is the biggest threat that we face. And at the same time, the Queen is apparently lobbying to stop, to be exempt from some of the climate action that the Scottish Government is trying to take.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, yes, they aren't the Queen, but they are involved in the royal family, and duties are slowly kind of being devolved down to them. And the fact that there's this lobbying taking place while they are also trying to emphasize their green credentials, it's hypocritical.
Yeah. So, do you think that in the potential event of an independent Scotland, this is one of the things that we might be talking about in terms of a referendum on monarchy?
I think we need to become independent first. So our independence referendum is a separate matter from a referendum on the monarchy. But
Mm.
I would definitely support, once we've achieved independence, a referendum on becoming a republic.
Do you think that the majority of the Scottish people would support that?
I don't think we're there yet, but we do have a organization in Scotland called Our Republic that is dedicated to making the case for a Scottish Republic. There has been a small amount of polling. There isn't a lot of good polling in Scotland, but it looks like the last time I checked, we were something like split 40-40 on wanting to abolish the monarchy and wanting to keep the monarchy, with then 20% being unsure. So I think it's a matter of convincing the unsures, but I think this is a matter for after independence, because we don't want to muddy the waters there.
Yeah. Would there be any benefit, in your view, to keeping the monarchy? Do you think that the Commonwealth is something that we should be thinking about or not?
Well, you don't need to retain the Queen as head of state to remain in the Commonwealth. So that is a separate matter. But no, I don't see any value in retaining the monarchy. People often point to things like tourism, but people aren't coming to see the Queen. They're coming to see castles.
Yeah.
Just don't see any benefit in keeping an unelected head of state. And this might be an unpopular opinion, but I don't think it's good for the royal family themselves either. Prince Harry has talked, repeatedly about how awful it was to, grow up in this environment, be
Mm.
born into this kind of fame and scrutiny. I don't think it is good to live in a society where anybody's destiny is determined by their birth, and that includes people who are privileged by that, like the
Mm.
royals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you, as I said, if we do end up in a situation where, we have a second Scottish independence referendum, is this something that will be part of the Scottish independence referendum? Do you think it will be discussed as part of it, or do you think that this has to be something that is just left aside until later?
I think this has to be something that is dealt with separately. I think the question of whether or not we want to be independent is a separate question from whether or not we want to abolish the monarchy. Canada is independent and has retained the monarchy. Australia is independent and has retained the monarchy. Ireland is independent and has not. So there are different routes to this. And, in countries like Australia that have been independent for a long time, they still regularly have discussion about whether they want to abolish the monarchy, and they probably will one day. I think that independence first, and then discussions about what we want to do with that independence second.
Mm. Just very briefly, then, you mentioned how people often cite tourism as one of the reasons for keeping a monarchy. But surely opening up the palaces and all the land that the Queen and the royal family currently own, if you were to open that
Yeah.
up to tourism and you were to allow people to come and stay in the palaces and, as some sort of historic, tourism spot,
Yes,
surely that would create more money, not less, for tourism.
exactly. Exactly. People are here to see the castles and the estates and the land. No one actually gets to see the Queen. When you think about, France, people go to see Versailles because you can go to see Versailles
Mm,
because it is no longer actually a royal palace.
yeah, fair enough. Thank you very much for that, Erin. Moving on to international news now, then. President Biden has condemned anti Semitism after a swastika has been found at the State Department. US President Joe Biden spoke out against anti Semitism after officials said that a swastika has been found carved into the wall of a US State Department elevator. Let me be clear, he said, anti-Semitism has no place in the State Department, in my administration, or anywhere in the world. It's up to all of us to give hate no safe harbour and stand up to bigotry wherever we find it, Biden tweeted late on Tuesday. Earlier in the day, a State Department spokeswoman told reporters the swastika had been discovered on Monday and that Secretary of State Antony Blinken had addressed the incident with department staff. The State Department is working on the nomination of a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, spokeswoman Jelena Porter told reporters. So, there's a lot we don't know about this. We obviously don't know why, or who did this, but it was carved into an elevator. So, obviously, it's somebody who has access or who has had access in some way to the State Department, probably for a period of time. Do you think, and obviously it's supposition, but do you think that this possibly further highlights the mindset of some of those who worked at the State Department under Donald Trump?
I mean, it's hard to say because unfortunately anti-Semitism is quite widespread. So we can't be sure whether it is a new employee or a holdover from the Trump administration, how long the graffiti has been there, if it was an employee or a visitor, we just don't know. But it does, it's very worrying that this kind of thing is happening within the State Department.
Yeah, and I mean we don't know. It's been supposed that this is was an anti-Semitic statement. It could also be just general agreement with fascist principles, which is equally horrific. Why is this becoming such a problem again in this time, do you think? Because people thought that we'd stamped this out years and years ago, didn't we?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very complicated question. I think in large part there has been a failure to learn from the past. We continue to try to appease right wing talking points and right wing figures by saying that, oh, people begin to feel this way because of economic uncertainty or that people have legitimate concerns. And we don't actually look at the messages that this is laundering into the mainstream. There's also, of course, the issue of how online communities tend to, and not so much online communities, but sort of things like YouTube algorithms tend to push people into more radical positions. The effect of being locked down for a year and a half has had on people adopting more radical positions in terms of not really having the ability to regulate themselves against their sort of normal everyday communities. There's all sorts of reasons, but I think primarily we failed to learn from the past that that the far right has to be confronted firmly and not be given any quarter.
Mm. There might be some people who think that, well, this is some sort of outlier, some bigoted person who's just graffitied here. Why is it, being taken as institutional? But it is institutional when you find it carved in the State Department of the US, surely.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, if if it was anywhere else and it was a just an outlying bit of graffiti and we weren't in a time of rising sort of far right sentiments and anti-Semitic sentiments and even fascist sentiments, that would be one thing. But that it was someone who had access to the State Department, possibly an employee, that suggests a failure of screening or something else, that there might be an institutional problem.
Yeah. What do you think can be done about it and should be done about it? What do you think President Biden is going to do about it?
Well, it is heartening that he's immediately responded. Um, I would this isn't really a subject I have much expertise on, but one would hope that that they are carefully reviewing their employees to see if there's been sort of any hint of this behavior at work.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. There has been significant easing of restrictions for fully vaccinated travellers from the EU and the US. Fully vaccinated people from the EU and US will be able to travel to Scotland without quarantining from Monday, the 2nd of August. The need for travellers to self-isolate for 10 days upon arrival in Scotland is being waived, subject to countries covered remaining on the amber travel list. The easing also removes the need for a PCR test on day 8 after arrival and is a major relaxation of travel restrictions that were imposed to protect wider public health in Scotland. All travellers will still be required to produce a negative test prior to departure and a negative PCR test on day 2 after arrival. The step has been made possible by the success of vaccination schemes here and abroad, with inbound travellers from the EU and US required to produce accepted documentation to prove they are fully protected with recognised vaccines. Erin, what is the documentation that needs to be provided in order to let people know that you have been fully vaccinated? Is it something on your phone, or what is it that we have to show?
Well, this is fairly new, this restriction easing. So I haven't really seen what we are accepting. I think it depends on the country of origin and how they are providing their proof of vaccination. So I know for us it's digital, but I'm not. I think it must surely is it country by country basis how they're providing their documentation.
Yeah. Does this highlight then that we are coming towards the end of restrictions? Obviously, August the 8th is the date that we have set in Scotland for the end of most restrictions. Do you think that we are on course to meet that?
I think it's looking good. I've been, following the COVID numbers, as I'm sure we all have, and our numbers are falling precipitously. They're falling like something a third week on week and have been all week. So I think we're looking good in terms of the trajectory of infection rates, and the vaccination program is proceeding apace. The vaccines are very good, so I don't see a reason why we shouldn't be.
Do you think that most people in Scotland will be keen for these restrictions to end and are looking forward to, this date on August the 8th?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some things that I'll continue doing, and I hope a lot of us will continue doing. I'll want to even when we eventually do remove the mask mandate, I'll still continue to wear a mask indoors. Even when we remove a lot of restrictions, I'll still keep doing some of the things we've been doing. But I think all of us are looking forward to. Well, not all of us, but I think most of us are looking forward to having a bit more freedom. And I think it was good of us to wait the extra few weeks because I think possibly in England, it looks like the numbers are starting to come down as well. But I think they relaxed a little bit too early relative to the progress of the vaccination program. But giving us the extra few weeks to get more people in their 20s vaccinated was, I think, a very good idea.
Yeah. Do you think there are going to be, although they're saying that people coming from the EU and the US are not going to need to self-isolate in the way that they were, do you think that there will be exceptions to that? So France, for instance, do you think that they will say people coming from France, still will have to because of the beta variant, etc.? Do you think that there's going to be exceptions?
I mean, it's hard to tell whether they're going to want to have separate restrictions for different countries in Europe as they're getting different variants. But if this is for people who have been double vaccinated, who have a much lower risk of being infected, then I'm not sure they're going to change that really.
Fair enough, thank you. Aberdeen's Rosehill Walkthrough Testing Centre has opened. Speaking at the launch of the walkthrough testing site in Rosehill, Aberdeen, Minister for Public Health Mary Todd said this walkthrough testing centre in Rosehill, Aberdeen is the 55th site across Scotland, providing testing options for people with and without coronavirus COVID-19 symptoms. As restrictions ease, testing is more important than ever to help protect people around you, and the progress we've made so far. Rapid lateral flow testing is already helping us to find cases that might otherwise have been missed, as around 1 in 3 people with COVID-19 do not show symptoms. you should still get tested even if you have been vaccinated. While the latest evidence suggests vaccines provide a high level of protection against the effects of COVID 19, they don't yet provide a guarantee that you can't still get the virus or pass it on to others. So, restrictions are ending then, but the pandemic isn't, is it?
Um, no, but at some point we do need to resume as much as we can of normal life. And all we can really do is try our best with making sure that we all get double vaccinated so that we don't get severely ill from the virus and we have a lower chance of being infected, though, as you say, not 100% protection against infection. And moving to more sort of consent based measures as opposed to legally mandated measures should hopefully help with public goodwill. But it is absolutely more important than ever to make sure that we get tested when we're going to be in sort of close quarters with people and to get tested if we have any suspicion that we might have been infected.
Yeah, do you think that people are still going to be keen to get tested after receiving two jabs? I mean, what's being said by the health minister today is that it's more important than ever, because you've had two jabs, to check to see if you've got it, because you could be passing it on to others. But do you not think that perhaps people who have received two injections will say, well, what was the point in getting these injections if I still have to constantly test myself when I'm showing no symptoms?
I mean, yes, there is some concern that people might react that way, and I think part of the problem is the way that we've dealt with the virus so far has been quite heavy-handed in terms of making it basically illegal to carry on with sort of life rather than doing more consent based measures. And people are now going to have compliance fatigue. But hopefully, with things opening up some more and with people seeing that normal life is resuming, they will understand that. If we want that to continue, then it is important to get tested. And tests really aren't onerous. They aren't difficult. We can all get lateral flow tests delivered to our homes. It takes, you know, a minute to do the actual swabbing and then half an hour to get your result. And then on top of that, we now have these walkthrough centers where you can get tested without having to book in advance. And it's a very important message that we continue to get tested, even if we've been double vaccinated, so that we can keep infection numbers low and keep everything open.
Yeah, you spoke there about compliance fatigue. Do you think that's something that we're going to see quite a lot of, especially now that things are starting to ease? Do you think that people are going to, if they're going to be advised to do something relating to the virus, that they're still going to do it in the same way that they were previously?
I actually think everything opening up a little bit is going to help because some of the compliance fatigue was with things like not seeing your family, not seeing your friends, not being
Mm.
able to do anything enjoyable. Being able to do those things again and not feeling like we're being penalized or judged for doing them will, I think, actually help people to comply with things like getting tested. Like right now, the way we do STI testing, that's entirely based on people's own willingness to do it. And the NHS is really excellent actually at contact tracing and encouraging people to get tested. And that's something that we should have learned more from. I mean, when we talk about again COVID and compliance fatigue and the kind of measures that we put into place and the way we sort of shame people for participating in activities where they get infected, we really should have learned more lessons from the HIV epidemic in terms of what didn't work was shaming people and putting moral judgments on them for getting it, and what does work is actually um, approaching people where they are and approaching people through how to stay safe and minimize harm while doing the things they want to do, which hopefully that is something we're moving towards now as things open up.
Yeah, of course, August the 9th is the date that nightclubs hope to reopen again. The Scottish football season is starting again, and then shortly after that, we're going to have the schools and colleges opening back up as well. Is there a danger that it's an awful lot of things reopening at once?
I mean, it is a lot at once, but the football season's already starting, and then
Yeah,
we're, another week and a bit away from opening clubs. Universities don't go back until late, so well into the autumn before universities go back, and secondary schools and primary schools will be a little sooner than that. So it is actually staggered,
staggered
and
enough.
if we're going to have regular testing of the secondary and primary school pupils, regular testing of university students, will be able to pick up upticks in infection. And by the time universities reopen, um, over 18s should have had time to be double jabbed. So
Yeah, do you think that more vaccines are going to be made available to younger people now then that the majority of the adult population has in some way been vaccinated?
Scotland's following the JCVI guidelines, which are not recommending vaccination for the 12 to 17 age bracket or 12 to 16 age bracket. So I don't think that is the case. We are going to be vaccinating people who are sort of in the months approaching their 18th birthdays, but other than that, I don't think we will be vaccinating the younger teens.
Yeah. I think there was talk they were going to vaccinate people between the ages of 12 and 16 who were in vulnerable risk categories or those who
Yeah,
lived
so
in
in vulnerable
households of
risk
those who were
categories,
immunosuppressed.
yes, yes. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there. But yeah, they were saying they were going to vaccinate the younger people who were in vulnerable risk categories and who were living with people who are immunosuppressed or in regular contact with people who are immunosuppressed, but not the sort of broader teen population.
Yeah, so that's not likely to spread out beyond that then. That's going to, oh, sorry, that's going to sort of stay just among people who are extremely vulnerable, do you think?
I believe that was the JCVI guideline recommendation.
Very much, Erin, thank you. A Scottish study finds that the vaccine for COVID-19 gives protection to the most clinically vulnerable. Findings from a Scottish study published earlier today show that a single vaccine dose offers as much protection from severe COVID-19 to people who were previously on the shielding list as it does for the rest of the population. The study, led by Public Health Scotland and supported by the University of Edinburgh, examined the effectiveness of the vaccine using data from over 100,000 people to determine its impact on reducing severe COVID-19 among those designated as clinically extremely vulnerable. Some medical conditions and certain medicines that affect the immune system can make people extremely vulnerable to COVID-19. As a result, this group were advised to take extra precautions during the first few months of the pandemic, including shielding at home. There are also concerns that a weakened immune system not only puts some people at greater risk of the complications of COVID-19, but that it may also reduce the effectiveness of the vaccines they receive. Reassuringly, the researchers found that the efficacy of a single vaccination dose in protecting against severe COVID-19 was as high or higher in those eligible for shielding as in those without risk conditions. So, um, is shielding now going to be a thing of the past, do you think? Is that something that we're not going to see anymore as August 8th approaches?
I mean, it is excellent news that people on the shielding list are getting as good a reaction to the vaccine as people who weren't on the shielding list. I'm really hoping that will reassure some people who had a lot of fear approaching sort of the reopening date. However, there are still people who are in the vulnerable categories who have not been able to receive the vaccine at all. There are people with allergies to the vaccine components. So, unfortunately, some of these people will still be facing a lot of difficulty.
Yeah. Do you know at all why it is that there was fear that those who were particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 might not respond in the same way to the vaccine? I mean, as somebody who is not in any way a scientist, I have to say that it seems like correct that that would be the case that if you are particularly vulnerable to something, then you will also be particularly sensitive to something that's trying to protect you from it. But as I say, I'm not a scientist in any way. Why do you think it was that people thought that the opposite would be the case?
Um, I'm a humanities PhD student, so also not a scientist, but it is my understanding that the main concern is people who are immunocompromised. So if your immune system does not react well to, it does not develop immunity naturally from infection, then vaccines basically work by stimulating your immune system. So if your immune system doesn't work well in the first place, it's not also going to produce a strong immune response to the vaccine. So I believe that was the concern. So both for people who are naturally immunocompromised and for people who are on sort of anti-rejection drugs after having a transplant or are immunosuppressed from chemotherapy, for example.
Really positive news then that people who are receiving the vaccine who are immunosuppressed or are particularly vulnerable are having as high or higher efficacy in terms of protecting themselves from the vaccine. That's good news, right?
Very good news.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, finally then, to Tokyo 2020 and the Scots facing off in medal events there. Duncan Scott has won Scotland's first gold medal at the Olympic Games in Tokyo as part of the men's 100 metres swimming medley team. The Scot was part of the four-man team which blew the competition out of the water earlier today, finishing in a UK record and a body length ahead of his opponents during his swim. Duncan Scott narrowly missed out on an individual gold yesterday in the men's 200 metres, finishing just a finger length behind his UK teammate Tom Dean from Maidenhead, and adding to his Olympic silvers in 2016 in Rio. The two medals won this summer by the Alloa-born swimmer are Scotland's first at this Games, but hopefully not their last, as they hold on to hopes of success on the track, in rowing, in shooting and in judo. Meanwhile, Andy Murray's doubles dream has ended in defeat in the quarterfinal doubles match against Croatia, losing in a closely fought three-set match to the Croatian pair of Marijan Cilic and Ivan Dodic in a tiebreak in the third. The defeat will come as a disappointment after having been a set and a break up in the first hour of play, with the former world number one claiming, "I would like to have done some stuff differently in the match to try to help out more." Murray had been forced to pull out of his defence of the men's singles tournament earlier in the week due to fitness concerns, but had continued to impress in the doubles. The match will now serve as what is highly likely to be Murray's last ever appearance at an Olympic Games. Scottish athletes achieved their best ever collective result in Rio in 2016, winning 18 medals in total, including 4 golds in Brazil. 14 medals with 7 goals were won by Scots 4 years prior to that at London 2012, with iconic performances by the likes of Andy Murray, Catherine Granger and Chris Hoy. Japan and China currently top the overall medals table, with the UK team in 6th, just behind Australia by 1 Olympic gold. So a bit of a shame then for Andy Murray, who looks as though he's possibly coming towards the end of his professional tennis career, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate about the injury that has sort of brought an end to his Olympics performance. I mean, yeah, he did complete sort of the doubles match even after sort of the injury that had him pulling out of the singles. But he's had a brilliant career, and the delay in the Olympics to 2021 has really affected a lot of athletes. So it was just good to see him compete again, even if it didn't end the way he wanted it to.
Yeah, I mean, how much further can he really go on, given all the injury problems that he's had? And I watched the documentary Resurfacing on Amazon it's about a year and a half, 2 years ago, before the pandemic, where he thought he was getting back to fitness, but it never really happened in the way that he'd hoped, did it?
Yes, it's unfortunate. But again, this has been an issue for a number of athletes in this Olympics, again, because of the delay. So much training goes into maybe less so for athletes who are competing sort of quite high level professionally in well televised, well followed sports like tennis, but in many other sports, so much of the training cycles go into building up and then tapering for an Olympics, and to have that whole sort of 4-year training cycle disrupted has been very difficult for a lot of people. And it seems like he's possibly one of them. We don't know how this would have gone if he had been competing last year. but again, he's been incredible sort of role model for Scottish athletes, and yeah, it was good to see him in one more Olympics.
Yeah. Scottish athletes won 18 medals at the last Olympics in Rio, and we had a high of, I think, 7 golds there in 2012. Do you think we can do as well this time as we have done previously?
Um, I mean, for me, it's really not that much about medal count. It is just about being able to be there on the world stage. It really is a very difficult Olympics to call. I mean, look what's just happened with the women's gymnastics. I think, people would have, a week ago said that America was odds on for the gold there. So you never know really what's going to happen when things have been disrupted this much.
Yeah, there's lots of people that have called, of course, on this Olympics to be cancelled, given not only the fact that it's happening during a pandemic, but also allegations of sexism, allegations of racism,
Mhm.
bullying, etc. Do you think that the people in Japan want this to be cancelled?
Well, I can't speak for Japan, but I think it probably would have been very unfair on the athletes to have canceled it. I mean, again, it's different for sports like tennis or football, where the people who are competing often do get to perform on the world stage, and that they do have sort of other routes to sort of recognition and competition that are globally recognized. But there are sports that only during the Olympics do they get sort of any exposure or respect for their sport. And it would have been very unfair to the athletes and these sort of less popular, less sort of televised sports to cancel sort of the thing they've been training towards this whole time.
Yeah. The Olympics, as much as I love them, and I'm sure many other people love them as well, haven't historically been very good at helping the economies of the nations who host them, have they?
No, I mean, this is something that definitely needs to talked about more broadly. I mean, um, there is something to be said for the wastefulness of building these massive facilities in a different city every 4 years, and whether or not we might be better reevaluating the way that we do the Olympics and what this means, or whether we should consider establishing permanent sites so that there isn't this massive wastefulness. I mean, yes, of course, countries do end up using the sports facilities sometimes. Though, I mean, I'm from Canada, where we've famously had a couple of Olympics where we didn't make great use of the facilities afterwards. So that isn't always the case. It is a question whether we should consider establishing permanent sites for the Winter and Summer Olympics, and then sort of rotating sort of who hosts in them as opposed to physically hosting.
Yeah, just finally then, would you like to see a separate Scottish Olympic team in the future at a future Olympics, perhaps, if not the next one, then the one after?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, when we're independent, we will have our own team, and then we'll have more opportunities for sort of just like fun, gentle rivalries with our neighbors.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Erin Lux, for joining us today. We have come towards the end of our programming. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We can only do what we do here at Broadcasting Scotland thanks to your support and generous contributions. So if you can at all, please consider contributing via the website and signing up for our regular programmes. I am Scott Bevan. I will be with you again on Friday evening. Thank you very much and good night.